Greetings. Welcome to the Daily French Show. I'm Gabriel Krauser. The show is brought to you by the Big Liberty Show and the Institute of Race Relations. Here we are once again talking about the news of the day. I'm joined by Nicholas.
How's it, Gabriel?
Marius.
How's it, Gabriel?
Terence.
Always a pleasure, Gabriel.
Yes, sirs. How's it? I think to kick us off, just a little anecdote from the Institute. We had a few car thefts on the streets outside our offices a couple of weeks ago. So we had some new staff coming in. And this is a story about the weather, by the way. And one of the new security guards said, "Oh, Mr. Gab." And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Oh, you're Mr. Gab. I've heard you're the guy who says, even when it's very cold, it's going to get colder." And he said, "Don't tell anyone, but I agree." I suppose that's a little bit the feeling that I have about politics too after the elections. Winter's not yet here. And to kick us off, I think I want to talk about the lead opposition party and their whip, Phumzile van Damme, who has been involved in somewhat of a controversial encounter at the V&A waterfront in Cape Town. Nicholas, do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So one of the first things to note about this story is that it's been very badly covered by the media, in the sense that there's been very little investigation of what's going on. We've seen most of it. All we've really seen in the media is what she said on Twitter about it, and the V&A waterfront issuing an apology to her. So
break it down.
The alleged incident goes something like this, from what I can glean. It started with her posting a video of her arguing with the V&A waterfront's security manager.
And if we can, just to let you know, if we can, we're going to try and splice that video in, but we'll talk about it.
Yeah. So what appears to have happened is that there was an argument between her and a woman in a grocery shop queue, in a grocery store queue. And afterwards, she went outside and she said that this woman was standing with her family in her words, a threatening manner. She then confronted them about why they were looking at her in a threatening manner and why they were filming her. And then according to her, they responded, "Because you're black." She then had an argument with them and said that they needed to leave, at which point he's either an elder teenager or a young adult approached her and apparently said, "Voetsak, you black," at which point she said that she hit him in the head. In self-defense, she says. So it's been recovered in the media as a racist incident, not as an alleged racist incident, because we don't actually know what really happened. All that's happened since then is she demanded an apology from the V&A waterfront for not taking her seriously, and she posted a video of her arguing with the security manager. And the V&A waterfront said, "Oh, sorry, we're investigating what happened, and we're sorry that you don't feel safe, and we would ban any racists who came to our premises." She says that she's trying to get CCTV footage, at which point she will lay charges against the young man for
who attacked her,
allegedly pushing her first.
Why do you need to wait for CCTV? You got to. I mean, if somebody's attacked you, you'd surely lay charges anyway. You don't need the CCTV.
So look, I think the thing about this issue is that poor as the media coverage has been, we're not really sure exactly what happened. We should not make the mistake of being too hasty to judge in the same way that others have been too hasty to judge. There are, however, reasons that questions should be further asked that go beyond the fact that she's a member of parliament, that she's a whip, and therefore very important sort of political figure in this country. One of those reasons is just sort of personal experience of being in the V&A waterfront, the thought that it's a place where people are kind of verbally assaulting each other based on race is hard to square with my experience. Of course, often things do happen that are hard to square with your experience. It's just a reason to ask more questions. Another reason, more particular reason to ask more questions, is Phumzile van Damme's track record on the race question. I remember quite clearly earlier this year, the Democratic Alliance was opening up a debate about whether it should pursue BEE light or whether it should pursue an EED-style policy, as the Institute of Race Relations advocates, where you don't use race as a proxy for disadvantage, which ends up meaning that black children of high net wealth individuals, millionaires, multimillionaires, billionaires, ended up getting treated as if they are in some kind of dire straits, but rather you look directly at disadvantage and you try and address those issues directly. That debate is a debate that South Africa really needs to have. And Phumzile van Damme weighed in by saying, look, if you think there's any connection between CADA deployment, BEE, and ESCOM's subsequent failure, then you are a racist. That's not a way to have a debate. That's a way to shut down a debate. Of course, Gwen Ngwenya was the head of policy at the time, and she was advocating a more EED-style approach, and she responded to Phumzile van Damme's tweets or anticipated them by writing a very detailed article for Politics Web, which I encourage everyone to check out if they have any doubts about the validity or at least the plausibility of the argument for why ESCOM and race-based sort of appointments go hand in hand. She made that argument very clearly, was made to feel unwelcome in the DA. The DA apparently had a discussion about BEE in which Musi Maimane said, shut up, again shutting down debate, and Gwen Ngwenya basically was forced out and resigned her position. And I think that does speak to Phumzile van Damme's character. She's an interesting character. She's clearly very bright, but she's also clearly very hasty to jump to playing the race card in incredible ways.
There's a history of that. 2 years ago, maybe, I'm not sure. Maybe Nick could, if you can remember it. She phoned a restaurant in, I think it was Cape Town, wanted to make a booking, told no, they're full, and apparently then a couple of minutes later, a white friend phoned and suddenly magically they had a booking. But this, of course, doesn't mean, so the story was apparently in between the time when Phumzile phoned and the other person phoned, a place did become open. So it's, I find it, I'm sure it probably does happen, but it's unlikely that restaurants in Cape Town are screening people based on their accents and saying their bookings or not. I mean, in this day and age, it probably happens, but I think it's so unlikely that it doesn't happen very often. Also with Phumzile van Damme, she also tried to dox that account on Twitter called @Salnomics. She claimed it was, won't mention the person's name, but claimed it was somebody who it wasn't. Put the name on Twitter, and that's doxing, which is probably legal according to the Poppy Act, and nothing's happened to Phumzile from the DA, even though Helen Ziller's apparently getting disciplined for tweets, so and Michael Carter and Galeb Kachalia both put fairly off-color things on Twitter, I mean, which I didn't agree with, but they're getting disciplined for that. And if they're getting disciplined for that, then Phumzile should get disciplined for basically doxing somebody, which is number one, dangerous, and number two, probably legal.
Yeah.
Well, I'd say that the sort of big elephant in the room was that, evidently a fist was thrown. And, I think that in itself, requires some explanation. We live in a society in which there are incredible levels of violence, and I think unless something really really heavy and immediate was taking place, it ill behooves a member of parliament to follow this course of action. By her account, I mean, I'm not sure that I really see a justification for doing it. But once again, this needs to be investigated. But for that reason, I think that those questions need to be asked, and it is curious that they're not being asked.
Yeah, and so I think in terms of it needs to be investigated. The thing is just to hold open that racism is a problem, racial discrimination is a problem. Playing the race card, which is a form of racial discrimination, sort of saying, because you're white, because I'm black, that's the reason that this conflict exists, is also a problem. And I think any investigation has to keep open that either of those problems might explain a significant portion of what's going on. And then also on top of that, there's the question of when violence is legitimate, and if it's ever legitimate for a member of parliament to deploy violence in order to respond to words. And just also just because a black and white South African have a disagreement and there might be a fist thrown, does not mean there was racism involved. People disagree all the time. And just because one person was black and one person was white does not mean there was necessarily a racial element.
I seem to remember that Professor Janssen at Free State University, when he was confronted with the string, one of his responses was to ban alcohol. Which apparently that had some sort of measurable effect.
Well, I think of sipping champagne.
I think our young colleague Nick Lorimer wants to.
I have one last thing, just on the media again, which is that the media hasn't been actually indifferent to the Phumzile case.
No.
There've been a couple of journalists who've actually said, good that she hit a racist in the face. So there's been already a complete taking of sides, and unless some sort of alternative media force goes to interview this, we're very unlikely to ever see what the truth was in this case.
Yeah. So
speaking of champagne,
from Phumzi to Zinzi, Zinzi Mandela tweeted that she was hanging out, sipping champagne,
Whining and dining
in Copenhagen, thinking of all the white trash, the land thieves, the scum, the ancestral sort of
terrible people
scion of Jan van Riebeeck.
The rapist descendants of Van Riebeeck.
The rapist descendants of Van Riebeeck down in cold.
huge lift through, I have to say.
So Zinzi Mandela's tweets have obviously been doing the rounds. She's been getting, I think it's fair to say that Twitter's been divided.
Yeah.
She's been getting a lot of support. She's also been getting a lot of criticism.
And the support and criticism is not based on race either. I've seen a lot of black people who've also criticized her for what's and some white people saying, "Oh, but we are a bunch of land thieves." You know? Yeah, exactly. I'm terrible. You know?
Yeah, I mean, I want to throw out this kind of controversial thing, but I think it is important to remember. Sol Plaatje, back in 1918, I think it was, just after the Land Act was passed, he laid a bet. Some people in the government were saying, look, black people really want this. Black people really want to be expelled from their land tenure arrangements and driven into the homelands. And he said, well, here's a bet. I will pay you the equivalent of like 50,000 Rand if you can get a room together with 12 such black people. And he said this to a black person who was sympathetic to the government. And of course, this never came to fruition. Likewise, and I think if you understand that bet and you understand why the bet never worked out and you understand why no one attended to it at the time because it was an awkward fact, an inconvenient truth, that there was no real support for the heinous policy, then you understand a lot about land reform as it was done in 1918. Likewise, there's this bet that's kind of on the fringes, but it is kind of at the center of the land reform story. The Transvaal Agricultural Union said, if you can find a white person who owns land that was stolen since 1917, since the 1913 Land Act, we will pay you 100,000 Rand reward. Go out, if you want to make money, Zinzi and Mandela, if you're sure that all white people are land thieves, go find a title deed history where the source of origin after 913 is a stolen bit of land, directly by that owner and his descendants. And they still have that money. They're still waiting for someone to come forward because, of course, the real land thieves were the government, who then sold the land to white people. And they gave them cheap loans. Certainly, it wasn't like what you'd call a perfectly free market arrangement. But if you understand that it was the government that did this, then I think you understand why it should be the government that should reform this through taxes that we all contribute, black and white, to pay back people whose land was directly taken, either in form of land or in the form of cash payments, which most people generally tend to prefer. And so I think that kind of the story of all white people are land thieves and Tao's bet, I'll bet you 100,000 Rand you can't find a bit of land that was stolen by a white individual in the last 100 years. I think there's an interesting connection there also to Sol Plaatje. But Zinzi Mandela, I don't know, do you think is she representative of the country? Is she representative of the government? Is she speaking just for herself? Well, is she an oddity?
She definitely represents someone. And I think most of those people are actually in government or in the EFF. She does represent a very particular kind of radical, you can find this attitude on universities that there is no legitimate place for white South Africans in South Africa and that they actually should be expelled.
And radicals almost always, or radical revolutions almost always led by the elite or by the middle class. And I mean, Zinzi Mandela, she's definitely middle class and she's definitely one of the elite.
She's sipping champagne.
So, exactly. So I mean, every revolution, our fairly peaceful revolution, was led by the elites of the ANC. The Russian Revolution was led by the elites of Russia. The Nazi Revolution was actually a middle-class revolution too. Would use working-class people as foot soldiers.
The Jacobins in 1789 France.
Exactly.
Relatively well off.
I mean, the colonial movements, or decolonial movements rather, almost always led by middle-class people, fairly well-educated people from those particular colonies. I mean, look at India, the Nehrus, for example. People who went to Oxford and so on. In Cambodia, Pol Pot spent 10 years in France or whatever, came back and decided to slaughter his countrymen. So it's always the middle class and the elite that lead these kinds of revolutions, whether they're good revolutions or bad ones, but I mean, it's always...
Well, you know, I certainly think that she's expressing thoughts that have been expressed, you know, in some way, you know, with various degrees of eloquence by people reaching right up to President Ramaphosa. I mean, you know, to talk about white people as land thieves, or having your time is over or whatever, and to talk about our people, that's a difference of expression, not necessarily of sentiment. And that's one of the reasons why I don't believe that that if she is given any sanction, there has been some talk that's come out of Durka recently that that she's violated the social media policy. But I think even if she's found guilty of that, it won't be particularly career limiting. I think for that you would really need the Danish government to make a big noise about this and say they don't want to be they don't want to have to deal with someone like this. But to me, the issue is somewhat broader than that. This behavior was incredibly unprofessional. The embassy in Copenhagen does not have its own Twitter account. If you are looking for South Africa in Denmark on the Twitterverse, you're going to go to her account. She lists herself there as ambassador to Denmark, and there's no sort of escape hatch there of saying in my personal capacity or anything. So. Yeah, you know, that does lead to certain conclusions about on whose behalf she is speaking or whom she is representing. And I don't think that that this is something that the South African state particularly wants to have advertised, you know, in a society like that. Denmark has, you know, those Nordic states had good links with the ANC, a lot of sympathy for their cause. So this disrupts that narrative. Now, the most interesting detail for me was that apparently Durka was unable to get hold of her for the last couple of days, which says something. She's back now, but she should be back now. Yes, but you know,
how unprofessional is that?
You lost an ambassador. Now, this is a problem that has been raised since the 1990s. Of the quality of our diplomatic representatives abroad. The National Development Plan actually asked, you know, what are we really getting for all of this? You know, 102 high commissions and embassies around the world, and that's excluding various other missions we have.
One of the most extensive foreign affairs outfits in the world, I believe.
You know, we are not getting much in the way of sort of development assistance or, you know, trade relations, and you know, I've been told quietly that the quality of information and, you know, intelligence on those foreign countries is such that the South African government actually has to hire consultants to do that.
Tony Leon talks about that in his books because he was ambassador to Argentina.
So, you know, what exactly do we as the citizens of South Africa and as taxpayers get for our diplomatic presence abroad? Now, when she said, "Oh, I'm wining and dining here," that's a finger in the eye of the South Africans she nominally represents and the Danes to whom she
obliged to go and represent us.
Yes,
I think that, I suppose her response clearly was in Twitter anticipating this kind of criticism. I am not accountable to any white person. I don't represent you. And if your interests are in me generating trade deals, if your interests are in me sort of making South Africa seem like a positive economic environment to go and invest, I'm not interested in what you have to say. And if you're a black person, it seems, I also don't represent you if you happen to take those things seriously, because then you're not authentically black. The only people that I really represent are people who are revanchivist, who think that there is congenital guilt being traced down by bloodlines, so that the sins of the fathers apply to the sins of the grandsons and granddaughters. And people like that certainly exist in South Africa, but
what happens now if you were drunk on Friday night, you're South African on holiday, and you lost your passport in downtown Copenhagen? What are you going to do? Are you going to go to the embassy? We'll hope for the best.
You catch a bus to Golden. Okay, I want to stick with international perceptions of South Africa. We noticed that the New York Times wrote about the land question. And Terence, I'm going to keep you on the hot seat here because I think one of the things you can look forward to is a piece by Terence responding to the New York Times. We'll see if they have the integrity to publish that. But talk us through that a little bit, please.
Yeah, this is by Professor Mahmoud Mamdani, who's you know, well known in Africanist circles. Essentially, what he is saying is that the the big existential and developmental challenge for South Africa is land reform. From this, pretty much everything else will follow, and it's the failure to do this that has ignited this the social movement led by students and the labor unions to bring about comprehensive land reform. There's just a lot that's wrong with it. Yes, students have been quite active in this land debate. Labor unions actually not so much. Land reform has been disappointing in South Africa, although he reduces it purely to a question of transfers. It's a far more complex thing, and I think what he is failing to do is to differentiate between the political profile that it's developed over the last 18 months and its real developmental potential. South Africa is not an agrarian society. Although there are certainly things that that a well executed land reform program could do, and I think that they are, for both moral and economic reasons, a good an essential thing to tackle. It's not going to be transformative. He alludes to urban agriculture, which we've seen around the continent. It's a livelihood strategy.
That's what I would point out. Like, I think he's fundamentally, I must understand South Africa, because he says part of the reason for land reform is to allow the urban poor to produce food and graze livestock in municipal commons. But does he want goats at the Wanderers, or what does he want? I mean, that's not. I mean,
that
South
sounds
Africa
like a splendid idea, Marius.
Yeah.
We don't win the World Cup. We're going to start having goats at the Wanderers.
Well, they might do better than the current bunch, eh? So.
Look, but that's a point. There's a great deal of research, places like Cameroon and Kenya, about urban agricultural strategies, and I think there's a fair amount you can do with that in South Africa. But one of the problems here is South Africa's cities, because of the apartheid spatial planning, are huge sprawling affairs. You have spaces where you could graze your sheep and your cattle, but that comes at a massive cost, which is distance from opportunities. In other words, the big challenge for South Africa is to densify.
Exactly.
And I'm not sure that's going to allow much space for those municipal commons. In fact, I don't quite know what he's referring to when he speaks about municipal commons.
Well, I mean, I have seen a little bit, like if you go around the Platteland, you'll find small little towns. They generally have a little bit of space around them. And for a long time, sort of for the last 100 years at least, they've tended to be stretches of land that are sort of, that people can sort of use communally. But there are a lot of dangers associated with it. Firstly, South Africa is different from Rwanda and Kenya insofar as it's not as fertile. So you need more land. It has to be more stretched out in order to carry the same capacity. And when things really start working, if you've got a lot of cattle and a lot of goats and a lot of sheep, then that interferes with traffic, sometimes lethally. So that's another problem you have to take into account. And the third problem is, as you say, in terms of this sort of zoning of those zones, if you're in a little town and people are surviving in a very subsistent style on semi-emaciated cows, you can't, using that municipal land, generally sort of plan to have grass. Winter's coming and then everything's dry in most of the country, and then after that, in September, there's no grass for the cattle to eat, and they usually get emaciated. And that means they can't calve the next year, which means you're not getting a return on your investment, and you're just sort of sitting with less cows. Sometimes they even die. 2016, sort of roughly half the cattle died in KZN, for example. That is not a sustainable growth creating solution.
Well, you see, this is it. Land, or I like to put it, to phrase as the land with the article and inverted commas, is a political expression, and it embodies a great deal of emotion and resentment. And I don't for a moment say that there's no basis for that. As a developmental strategy, as a growth strategy, it is dreadfully deficient, and it will not. It is not a solution for South Africa. And to focus on the racial identity of landowners, well, you'd also need to talk about where those holdings are. Something like half of KwaZulu-Natal, which is on balance the most fertile part of the province, is in the trust of the Zulu King. The Northern Cape, which is mostly owned by white and to some extent coloured landowners, is the country's least fertile.
Yeah.
But if you wanted to achieve that magic 30% figure, all you'd have to do is buy the Northern Cape and hand it over.
Marley's been saying that for a long time. Just buy the Northern Cape. If what you want is a cookie cutter kind of New York Times approach, where you get to say we've redistributed.
You can probably buy the Northern Cape for $50 and a half sack toffee as well. So.
Yeah.
But there's a kind of insanity here, right? As Terence has been saying, this is all messing about in the margins. We need to be growing manufacturing and services and developing our education system and innovating.
Well, that's the thing.
Investing heavily in creating a much larger, even if it's not just subsistence agriculture, but actual successful commercial agriculture. That's not going to throw us forward into the ranks of developed first world countries.
Yeah, agriculture is 2% of GDP.
But it's also
What successful country in the world has agriculture as more than 5%?
It's a paternalistic way of also looking at people, saying these people don't want the same things people in Europe or America want. We know what's best for them. They want to go scratch out a subsistence existence on a godforsaken piece of land somewhere. But they actually want to be like anybody else, live in the cities, have decent access to jobs and education for their children and so on. Yeah. That's what the majority of people in the whole world want.
Okay, so now on to our last topic. It seems to me like we feel like we're super bright. Eh? I mean, we do spend a lot of time thinking about this and going out and researching.
Yeah.
Well, at least we seem like we're brighter than the New York Times, which I think a lot of people
that's
rate
not difficult.
very high. But Marius, do you think that we are kind of eggheads sitting in some ivory tower with big ideas of what the country really needs and totally out of touch with most South Africans?
I don't think so. I mean, you may be, but I think the rest of us aren't.
Tell me why.
No, I think,
Tell me about the Hope Report.
The Institute's been around for 90 years and we've got a lot of experience with this kind of thing. But as you've just mentioned, the Hope Report. So we've done this now. This is the fourth one in recent years where we look at the state of race relations in South Africa. And each of these Hope Reports gives us the same findings. Doesn't matter what methodology we use, what polling company. And the finding is that race relations are actually surprisingly sound in South Africa. Most South Africans want to work together, get on with each other, and given what we've gone through, I mean, some people would say that's actually quite surprising, but I think part of the reason is that fundamentally human beings are decent and want to treat each other as another human being, and I think two other reasons is post-1994, the ANC actually did very well in growing the economy, expanding basic services to people, and when people have their basic needs met, then they're not going to go look for scapegoats or look for people of different origin to why their life is perhaps bad. But now, I mean, could be an argument made that race relations have declined or got a bit worse since 2009, and we all know what's happened in 2009. President Zuma became the leader of the country, and the economy, if it didn't tank, it's definitely stagnated. But I think, so two of the reasons why the race relations have done all right in South Africa post-1994 is because of the ANC, for all its faults. It did pretty well in building a growing economy. And number two, with Nelson Mandela, again, there's lots you can criticize the man on, but he did very well. And again, partly due to the ANC, he worked to build a common South Africanism, which we didn't have before. And I think, you could say it's like whatever, rainbows and unicorns or whatever, but it's an important thing for people who are who share this territorial space to feel that they are part of one thing. I mean,
we're in a project together.
Exactly. You can look at the flag and the Springbok jersey and you can tear up when you watch replays of the 95 World Cup, whatever. But I mean, these are actually important things, actually.
Okay, so I want to finish on this little story about rainbowism. I think it is a standard move in the media to say that whenever someone is tearing up or whenever someone thinks that the races need to work together, it's sentimental, it's schlocky, it's kind of indulgent. It's the kind of thing that you would do if you were sipping champagne in some fancy place like Copenhagen. In my experience, it's just the opposite. Rainbowism is a survival strategy. Winter is coming. When it gets cold, you need to make a fire. You need to stay warm. You need to stay insulated. You need to keep getting food on the table. And that means working with people. working with people who look like you, working with people who don't look like you.
But I just want to give an example because I'm a very well-traveled man. So when I was in Buenos Aires a couple of years ago, I was sitting in a restaurant by myself having a beer. Did you roll your eyes, Nick? So and then there was then at the restaurant, the guy was asking the people walking past, where you from, come eat ya, blah, blah, blah. Then a guy said, no, I'm from Cape Town. I was like, oh, you're from Cape Town? I'm from Joburg. And me and this guy didn't know each other from Bar of Soap. Sat together all day, had beers, invited me to his wedding. I'd known him for about 3 hours. And he was a black chap. But I mean, was it? I wasn't like, he was like, no, I'm not going to talk to this guy. Yeah. I was like, we both from South Africa. We both got something to talk about. We had a great afternoon. I'm still friends with the guy on Facebook, and I've met him once in my entire life.
Did you go to the wedding?
Yeah. No, I didn't.
Okay, guys, on that happy news, have a really good day. This is the Daily Friend Show. Check us out if you want to read about some of the stories that we've mentioned we're going to be writing, and generally some excellent analysis on South Africa. Check out dailyfriend.org.za.
Dailyfriend.co.za.
Dailyfriend.co.za. And have a good day.